Now, back to nothing but sports talk and maybe a little Game of Thrones talk. No? Pretty Little Liars? Fine, just sports. Back to Zach Gelb on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
Welcome back, Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. Time in the Princeton Orthopedic Associates studios is 4:37. Unfortunate news today as we've lost both Buddy Ryan and Pat Summitt. And you take a look at the resume of one Pat Summitt, and I can't list you all of her accomplishments because then we'll never be able to get to my next guest because there's so many of them. Basketball Hall of Famer, 8-time champion, 7-time Coach of the Year, and did a tremendous job at Tennessee, and that's even an understatement, saying that from 1974 to 2011, where she compiled a record of 1,098 wins to 208 losses. That's an .841 winning percentage. And now joining us on the hotline to remember the great life of Pat Summitt is the head coach of your Temple Owls basketball team, and that is Tonya Cardoza. Coach Cardoza, thanks for a few minutes, and how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. It is a somber day in the women's basketball community as we mourn the loss of one Pat Summitt. What was your reaction when you heard the news this morning?
I was devastated. I actually found out on Sunday that she wasn't doing well, and, it was a shocker. And then waking up this morning, finding out that she had passed, it definitely, I think, took, the women's basketball community, for a loss. When you have someone that has grown the game for women's basketball and has done so much, laid down the foundation for so many people and, things to strive for greatness, it's definitely a sad day.
You were clearly involved in that Tennessee-UConn rivalry. Just when you think of the name Pat Summitt and how much she's done for your sport, what are some memories that come back to mind of your time interacting with her?
Honestly, one of the things when I was a player at Virginia, all 4 years that I played there, my last game was against Tennessee. We lost to them every year that I was there in the NCAA tournament. So that was something that, as a player, facing a Tennessee team, you always want to find a way to beat them. And the fact that as a player, I was never able to do that was disappointing. And then when I went to UConn in my very first year, knowing that we were going to, bring them into Gamble and play against them, it was exciting. But whenever you see her, it's one of those things that you look up to her like, she's a legend, and that's what she was. So that first time beating, Tennessee, obviously it was on a different side. It was, as a coach, but it was rewarding. And I think for so many people, because of what Pat stood for and what her program stood for, whenever you can beat Tennessee, it was, it felt great because what she stood for, excellence, passion, and, she was great. Her teams were great. So, to be able to beat them as a coach, it was definitely rewarding.
There's always a mutual respect in a rivalry like you guys had with UConn and Tennessee, and we clearly hear that in your voice today. And there's always a rivalry in a regular season, but it elevates when it gets to the postseason. And you guys have met up in the national championship, Final Fours. That UConn-Tennessee rivalry, it's an all-time great rivalry, and it's one in all the sports that people should really look at and just remember a lot of great games between those two teams, Coach.
Most definitely. I mean, when you have someone like Pat and then you have Gino, who obviously looked up to Pat and, like I said, Pat paved the way for so many coaches. And now you have Gino that's trying to build his program like she did. Now they're facing off. Most of the time it was like 1 versus 2. And you're trying to get to where she is. And definitely that first year was something, great for us all. To be able to win a national championship, and the fact that it was against them. And, that game in itself, you have 2 legends. One, like the teacher, basically. I look at Pat as being the teacher to Gino, and, something that Gino wanted was to be able to, build his program and to be great and strive for excellence. And those are all things that Pat did. And, I think all coaches wanted to try to emulate what she was able to do at Tennessee. And, It just so happens that because Gino wanted to be great too, he took on the challenge, and it just became the biggest rivalry because you have two competitive people that really love the sport of women's basketball.
Was there an extra sense of that competitive vibe in that UConn facility that's always so intense when you guys would go out there and play Tennessee? Did it feel like, hey, this is just not another game, this is something that's a little bit bigger?
I think whenever you play Tennessee, it's always something bigger because it's Tennessee, because of what Pat was able to do. Again, she laid down the foundation. She's a pioneer. In the early 80s, 90s, they're just winning championships, and not just championships, they're winning games. It's a program that didn't really lose games. They won games. So whenever you play Tennessee, whether it's regular season for a championship, it's always a big deal because it's Tennessee.
We're talking to Tonya Cardoza, the head coach of the Temple women's basketball team, has been the head coach from there since 2008 and also spent a bunch of years on Gino Auriemma's staff from 1994 to 2008. Really the beauty of college coaching, and it's more than just wins and losses. You develop players and you make them become better people. How did Pat Summitt make people become better people, and Gino Auriemma as well, just having an insight to both of those two coaches for so many great years?
I think, honestly, the expectation of both of them, they're both very passionate about the sport, very competitive, and they strive for excellence, not settling for just being mediocre, but wanting to be the very best. And I think, both of them do that and instilling that in their players and not letting, players settle for anything less than that. And I think that, that's something that I take from both of them. Definitely, trying to teach players today that it's not just a game, but all the other little things that you can learn within the game and how to be good people and to make sure that you take what you're learning into the real world outside of the sport.
And I know she had a reduced role ever, since she was diagnosed, but she still went on and coached that 2011-2012 season. That just shows how strong of a fighter she really was, Tonya.
Most definitely. I mean, when you watch her on the sidelines, you know that she wanted to be out there. And, the fact that that group of kids got to sit there and still learn from her and be around her and her presence, I thought that was great, for them to still be able to be coached by her in some capacity. But she didn't want to walk away. I mean, that we thought that she would still be there for, a very long time. The fact that she's 64, still had tons of years, who knows what would have happened. But, she unfortunately had to step away from the game. But I think we all learned a lot from her and definitely will continue to grow the game.
When you would be in Gino's office and you guys would be preparing to go out there and face a team like Tennessee, what was the toughest part about preparing for a Pat Summitt team, just knowing how prepared she was, being an all-time great coach?
I think it wasn't just the game. We would prepare months in advance. That's one thing that Gino does. It's not like he's preparing you for that particular game the day before or 2 games before that. It's a process throughout. But when that game is, the next game on the schedule, he tried to take a little bit of pressure off the players and put more so on himself, but just giving them, the game plan, but taking away the Tennessee on the chest. And that's what, we try to do now, take away the UConn off the chest and just go out there and just play basketball. So, trying to down the game a little bit and not put so much pressure on the players, but just going out there and having fun. We'd always talk about everyone's going to be watching. This is our turn to step up and show the world what UConn was all about. And, we knew that the audience was going to be paying attention and making sure that we put on a good show for women's basketball.
Obviously, her health wasn't good at the end, but what kind of relationship did Gino and Pat have in, the last few years when she was battling this illness?
They're, like I said, they're both very competitive and, both strive to be the very best. And I know that more so than anyone, he probably was, disappointed in hearing of her illness. And I'm sure he reached out and, because that's who he is. He's a great guy. But it's sad that that's probably what people think of when they think of Pat and Gino, is the rivalry towards the end. But they had a great friendship and admiration for each other. Again, they were just two competitors that were, just wanted to win and very passionate about what they did.
We're talking to Tonya Cardoza, and before we let the head coach of the Women's Temple Owls run, I have to ask you this. She's a pioneer for your game, no doubt about that, and she's a legend, and, there's only, so many words I could say about her because she really did make such an impact on the game of women's college basketball, and really your players, and I'm sure they do know this, but players in future generation all around the game of women's college basketball have to remember what Pat Summitt did. As a coach, how will you continue to just teach about Pat Summitt to some of your younger players throughout the next few generations?
Again, just making sure, like I said, she laid down the foundation, and now as college coaches, assistants, head coaches, we have to continue to grow the game and, strive for excellence. I had a couple of the players in my office today, and we were talking about, being excellent and not going through the motions, but actually going out and taking things and earning what we think is ours. So just continuing to teach my players about being passionate about the game and striving for excellence and not settling for anything else, and just keep inspiring each other and inspiring us to be great, inspiring us to be better.
Well, Tonya, we do appreciate a few minutes today. I'm sure I'll catch you at Lincoln Financial Field for a Temple Owls football game this year. And then we also, soon enough, will be the start of the Temple basketball season for both men's and women. So we appreciate a few minutes today. Thanks so much.
I thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. There is Tonya Cardoza joining us on the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. And that's what's so cool. When you have a rivalry, Geno Auriemma, Pat Summitt, and both of them are trying to go out there and win a basketball game when they met up in the Final Four, when they meet up in a national championship game. But there is so much of a great respect between those two adversaries over so many years. And that's the way that it should be. When the ball goes up in the air, you're fighting, you're competing, you want to win. But when that final buzzer sounds, you're friends. And that's what it is. Now, you could have a disdain for one person, but when you have two legends like that, Geno Auriemma and Pat Summitt, we've just been so fortunate to see what they were able to do for so many years. And look at that program that Geno now has. Look what Pat had at Tennessee. It's just, in a sport that doesn't get that much coverage, it got a whole lot of coverage when you had Tennessee and UConn going at it. I remember some of those UConn players, and Tennessee as well. Oh, there was just so many good games. There really was. And, there is that mutual respect between a Pat Summitt and a Geno Auriemma. And that's what's so cool about this whole thing. And we appreciate Tonya Cardoza for giving us a few minutes there. And she had a great insight to it. Because from 1994 to 2008, she's a protege of one Geno Auriemma, and she got to know that UConn program better than anybody.